As 5G rollouts mature and start to embrace distributed telco cloud architectures and 5G core deployments, so questions about security get louder. So, what are the major 5G network security questions that need to be addressed as edge platforms play an increasingly prominent role? Well, I'm talking today with Tom Walker, Manager, Consulting Systems Engineering, Telco and 5G at Fortinet, about this absolutely critical topic. So, Tom, 5G is advertised as the most secure 3GPP generation yet, with many of the historic security issues now resolved. Would you agree with that assessment? And if so, is it enough?
So in general, yeah, I would agree with that. I think when we look at some of the historic problems that have been within the different 3GPP generations, 5G makes huge strides forwards in mitigating those historic issues of security, privacy, and other functions. So certainly, I would in part agree with that. However, one key aspect is that although 5G brings enhancements with resolving those historic security issues, the shift in the technology, the architecture that's used, and the overall way that 5G is built and deployed by embracing new services like web services, cloud platform, software-defined networking, network function virtualization, they ultimately also introduce additional levels of risk and threat that the operators need to consider. So those particular issues were not so present with the older generations, and the traditional issues with those older generations have somewhat been resolved, but there are other areas of security focus that the telcos need to think about. For example, 5G brings a lot more service exposure. So being able to expose more of the functionality, more of the service capabilities to the customers and to third parties, as well as to other operators. And also, for example, programmability. The 5G network and the cloud platforms in which they run are driven by a programmable nature. And that programmable nature also brings with it risk and threat.
So, with 5G being a natively more open and distributed system, what are the main security implications for 5G's core and edge?
So I think we need to think about fundamentally that this more open and distributed architecture powers the new services and functions that 5G offers and potentially offers. But in order to do that, there needs to be more integration with additional third parties and vendors and technologies, and embracing more open and connected methods of that integration. And that naturally brings a level of risk and threat because, yes, something is more open, but at the same time, being more open means that you potentially expose yourself more to risk and threat. The other aspect that's important here is that the network architecture and the services and how they are delivered requires more of that function to be distributed closer to the consumer, closer to the edge, ultimately closer to the subscriber. And that means distributing functions that are traditionally within the core of the network, much closer to the edge of the network. And those functions are critically important in delivering the overall capabilities, but also importantly, they are a potential threat vector back into the rest of the network environment. And also by distributing that environment capability, you as an operator naturally have to embrace locations that are not necessarily within your control. And that could be at a customer environment, a customer site. It could be a third party environment or site, or it might be a third party cloud platform provider or cloud service provider. And that brings with it an additional level of potential threat and risk as well.
Now, in previous mobile generations, the mobile system was mostly based on proprietary technology and protocols that were unique to those networks. 5G breaks from that design and architecture towards more standard IT and cloud technologies and architectures. How is that shift linked to 5G security implications?
Indeed, so 5G embraces this use of predominantly web services and web-driven protocols and architecture platforms on top of a distributed cloud environment. And that is a very IT centric or cloud services provider centric way of working. And that gives huge flexibility to what 5G can offer, and the distribution of the 5G services. But the very nature of embracing those IT centric methods and capabilities and web services means that the operators themselves have to think about the security issues that have been experienced in both the IT services industry and the cloud platform industry for a number of years. And they have to really address those fundamental security issues with those types of technologies, applications, and protocols. So, although 5G really shifts towards solving some of the historic security problems, it potentially opens new security issues and areas of consideration. And really, from an operator perspective, that comfort blanket factor of utilizing very specific protocols and applications and services that are only really used within the telco environment has somewhat shifted as the telco now embraces generic IT services functions, platforms, protocols, and applications, which come with their own inherent set of risks and threats. So the operator really needs to consider ensuring that those historic types of threats with those new applications are not introduced to their new 5G network environments.
Now, edge compute sites could be based in trusted or untrusted locations. Edge sites might be owned by the mobile network operators or enterprises, hyperscalers, integrators, solutions vendors, and so on. What approach needs to be used to ensure security for all of these different cases?
I think one of the key aspects, and something that we embrace a lot when considering cybersecurity, is a concept of zero trust. So even though there will be sites and locations that are owned by the operator, and secured by the operator, having two different security approaches, depending on whether it's a site owned and operated by the telco themselves, or whether it's in a third party site or a customer location, really adds a lot of complexity because you've got two different security approaches, you've got potentially different technologies you need to use, and two different operational methodologies of dealing with those types of services. So the important aspect for the operator is to really solidify a zero trust methodology, which means that they apply the same level of security control, irrespective of whether that environment is in their control, it's in their site, their location, or importantly, in a third party site or location, or even a customer environment. And by utilizing that zero trust methodology, they mitigate as best as possible any potential security threat, irrespective of where that edge environment is located.
So the edge presents a significant opportunity for enterprises, network operators, application providers, and hyperscalers. Security implications exist across all aspects, stakeholders, and functions. But what is the role of security and, importantly, security responsibility in such an ecosystem?
I think the important aspect here is that because of the nature of the edge being a multitude of different stakeholders, technologies, vendors, applications, and services, it ultimately means that there needs to be a shared responsibility model. You can't realistically put all of the security responsibility either on the operator, the network operator, or on the cloud service provider, or even on the customer or any of the third parties. There needs to be a level of shared responsibility, and shared into working and understanding of what that common security approach is. I'll give you a great example. So let's say a telco wants to deploy an edge technology environment within a customer location. Now, the platform that they deliver could well be owned and operated by the telco, but the fact that it's sited within the customer's location means that the physical security and how somebody can potentially get to that equipment and that platform is not within the telco's control. And also importantly, that edge environment is highly likely to also utilize other types of applications and services that the customer deems required, again, the telco has no control over. and potentially no influence on. So there needs to be this concept really of a shared responsibility model and a shared ownership model across the edge as a whole, really.
Absolutely. And it's clear that 5G, I think, is bringing a lot more collaborative efforts into the industry as a whole. Tom, thanks very much for joining us today and sharing these insights. Network security, absolutely critical to 5G strategies. Tom, thank you.
Thank you.